The screen opens to a desolate, wind-swept graveyard. The sky is a vast, empty canvas of bruised clouds, and the air is heavy with the scent of sagebrush and rain. A lone man, Thomas, stands before a freshly turned grave. He is a man carved from the land itself, broad-shouldered, weather-beaten, his face a roadmap of hard-won experience. But in this moment, his immense strength seems to have abandoned him. He stands motionless, hat in hand, a silent monument to his grief. He has no tears left, only a profound, silent ache for the man who lies beneath the earth. Daniel, his dearest friend, a brother forged not in blood but in the unforgiving crucible of war. He remembers Daniel's laughter, his quiet, poetic soul, the flash of steel that saved his life. And now, there is only the silence of the grave, a silence that rings louder than any battle cry. He rides back to his solitary ranch, the immense space that once represented freedom now feeling like an empty echo chamber for his grief. He finds a letter waiting for him on his porch, its seal broken, its contents Daniel's last will and testament. The sight of his friend's familiar, elegant handwriting sends a fresh wave of sorrow through him. Thomas sits at his rough-hewn table, a single candle casting long shadows on his grim face. He reads of Daniel's love for the small, struggling ranch and his concern for his widow, Isabella. A small sum of money and the ranch itself are left to Thomas, a legacy of friendship and honor. He expects this. But the final, crushing clause is a shock, a sudden blow that shatters his grief into 1,000 pieces of bewilderment and dread. The words were not a request, but a sacred command from the grave. And to ensure my beloved Isabella is safe and protected, I ask that you, my dearest friend, marry her. I know you will honor my final wish. The will was not a suggestion. It was a promise, a final, unshakable burden that bound the living to the dead. Thomas, a man who lived by a code of honor forged in the chaos of battle, knew what he had to do. His word was his bond, and a promise to a dying friend was the most sacred vow of all. He would do it. He would honor the man who saved him. But as he looked at the words again, a cold dread began to grow in his heart. The woman he was to marry was a complete stranger, a woman he had already judged based on the scraps of information he had from Daniel's passionate letters. Thomas had built a grim picture of Isabella in his mind. Daniel, a poet, had always written of his wife as a delicate, refined city woman, a sensitive soul who needed constant care and protection. Thomas, with his rougher sensibilities, translated this into a different image, a demanding, emotional creature who would wilt under the brutal sun, wailing for attention and demanding a life he couldn't provide. He imagined a woman who would see his home not as a sanctuary, but as a dirty, uncivilized place. A woman who would see him not as a protector, but as a gruff, unfeeling brute. He would be marrying not a wife, but a burden of endless demands and fragile feelings, a constant, painful reminder of the friend he had lost. His journey to Daniel's ranch was not one of hope, but a pilgrimage of duty, a somber procession toward a fate he was convinced would be nothing but misery. With every mile he rode, his mind painted more grim pictures. He imagined Isabella waiting on the porch in a fussy, impractical dress, her face red with tears, demanding to know why he hadn't arrived sooner. He imagined her helpless, weeping over a broken fence post, expecting him to solve all her problems. He imagined a woman who would see his quiet nature as a sign of disrespect, a woman who would fill his silent home with a demanding chaos he had no patience for. He prepared himself for the worst, his posture growing more rigid with every passing hour, his hand unconsciously resting on the gun at his hip, a familiar weight of control in an uncontrollable situation. He finally arrives at Daniel's small ranch. It is a stark contrast to his own vast spread, but there is a strange, quiet dignity to the place. The fences are sagging, and the porch roof leaks, but the windows are clean, and a small chaotic garden in the front is bursting with a wild, untamed beauty. A dog, a small, loyal-looking mutt, trots out to meet him, its tail wagging in a quiet, friendly manner. Thomas dismounts, his heart thudding in his chest like a war drum. He feels a profound sense of unease, a man about to face his fate. He walks to the front door, his knuckles raised to knock, when the door opens. Isabella stands in the doorway. The image he had built in his mind, a fortress of preconceived notions, crumbles in an instant. She is not the fragile, demanding woman of his imagination. She is small, but her posture is straight and strong. Her eyes, a warm, steady hazel, hold a profound sadness, but they are not filled with tears. She is dressed in a simple, worn dress, and her hands, though delicate, are smudged with dirt and a small cut. She holds a hammer in one hand, not a handkerchief. She is quiet, composed, and watches him with a stillness that is unnerving and completely unexpected. Her presence is not one of dramatic grief, but of quiet endurance. Isabella. Her voice is soft, but clear and steady. You must be Thomas. It is a statement, not a question. Her voice holds no drama, no hysterics. It is simply a woman acknowledging the arrival of her future husband, a man she, too, has only known from Daniel's letters. She looks at his face, at the grief and reluctance etched there, and a quiet, shared understanding passes between them. Thomas is utterly, profoundly wrong-footed. He came prepared to be a hero to a damsel in distress, but he has found a fellow soldier, a woman who had already been fighting her own battles. The burden of his promise is a heavy weight, but the reality of the woman who holds it is a complete and bewildering surprise. The days following Thomas and Isabella's wedding passed in a state of stilted, respectful silence. Thomas, burdened by his promise, threw himself into the ranch work with a grim determination. Isabella, for her part, moved through the house and the grounds with a quiet competence that baffled him. Their life was a study in polite, distant coexistence. He saw the house getting cleaner, the pantry more organized, but he still expected the other shoe to drop, for the demanding woman of his imagination to finally appear. One morning, Thomas noticed a new leak in the porch roof, a steady drip that had begun to rot the wood. His mind immediately went to his preconceived notions. He pictured Isabella wailing, demanding he fix it at once. He planned to get to it in his own time, after he finished mending a fence on the far side of the property. But as he prepared to ride out, a flash of movement on the roof caught his eye. He stopped dead in his tracks. Isabella was on the roof, a bucket of shingles beside her. Her simple dress was tied up to keep it out of the way, and her arms, though slender, moved with a steady, practiced rhythm as she hammered a new shingle into place. She was not a damsel in distress. She was a woman doing a job. The sight was so completely at odds with his mental image of her that Thomas could only stand there, speechless. The hammer strokes, sharp and decisive, were like blows against the fortress of his prejudice. She saw him standing there, but she didn't stop. She simply offered a small, polite nod of acknowledgement, then went back to her work. Narrator. Thomas had expected to find a woman who needed saving. He had expected a delicate creature with soft, useless hands. Instead, he found a woman who was perfectly capable of saving herself. Her calm competence was a stark rebuke to his own chauvinistic assumptions. The city woman of his imagination, helpless and demanding, was gone. In her place was a woman of quiet strength, a woman who understood that a leaky roof was not a tragedy to be wept over, but simply a problem to be solved with a hammer and a few shingles. He felt a grudging respect stir in his chest, a flicker of admiration that he had not been prepared to feel. The next day, As Thomas worked on the fence, a sudden bang from a distant tool shed spooked one of the horses, a large, skittish mare that Daniel had been trying to break. The horse bolted, its eyes wide with fear, galloping toward the open range. Thomas dropped his hammer, preparing to give chase. He expected Isabella to cry out in panic, to run inside, to fear the raw power of the animal. But she did none of those things. She simply emerged from the house, a bucket of feed in her hand. She stood in the open, her body relaxed, her voice a low, melodic coo that carried on the wind. She didn't chase the horse. She let the animal see her, hear her calm voice, and smell the familiar oats. She spoke to it in soft, reassuring tones, a language of trust that Thomas didn't know she possessed. Slowly, miraculously, the horse slowed its panicked gallop, its ears swiveling to her voice. It circled her, its breath puffing out in great clouds, until it finally came to a stop and hesitantly walked toward her. She calmly offered it the feed, her hand a steady, non-threatening presence. She led the immense animal back to the corral, her strength not a physical force, but a quiet, commanding confidence. She was a woman who could tame a wild horse with nothing but a soft voice and a calm heart. The sight shattered the last remnants of Thomas's prejudices. He had thought her weak and fragile. He had thought her a woman of books, not of the land. But he had been profoundly wrong. The reality of Isabella was a constant, humbling surprise. He saw now that her strength was not loud and aggressive like his, but quiet and deeply rooted. He felt not just respect, but a burgeoning curiosity, a desire to understand who this woman truly was. He was a man who knew the language of the land and of animals, but he realized that Isabella spoke it just as fluently. He had been so busy judging her from afar, he had failed to see the quiet warrior right in front of him. That evening, a calm, easy silence had settled over the house. The awkwardness hadn't completely vanished, but it had softened into a comfortable quiet. Thomas sat at the kitchen table, oiling a saddle, while Isabella quietly tended to the fire. Neither spoke, but a new kind of communication had begun, a shared rhythm of work and existence. She watched him, too, her gaze observant and thoughtful. She saw his grief, still a palpable presence, and she saw the honor that drove him to fulfill his friend's final wish. She saw a quiet loneliness in him that mirrored her own. He wasn't a brutish cowboy. He was a good man, trying to do a good thing. She knew he had come expecting a burden, but she was slowly coming to see him as a friend in her own grief, a silent partner in the immense task of moving forward. The act ends with a quiet, powerful moment. As Thomas finishes his work, he looks up to find a glass of cool water sitting beside his tools. Isabella has placed it there. It is a small, simple gesture, an act of silent care. The promise that had once been a heavy, dreaded burden was now a quiet, living partnership. The fear in his heart was gone, replaced by a profound curiosity, and the beginning of a deep, unspoken admiration for the woman he had married, but had just truly met. The afternoon sun streams into the small, tidy house, but the weight of Daniel's memory still hangs in the air. Thomas, in his stoic way, is repairing a loose floorboard in what was Daniel's small study, a room filled with books and maps. It is the one room Isabella has not yet touched, a sacred space. As Thomas pries up the board, a small, polished wooden box is revealed beneath. The box is old, its hinges rusted, and Thomas knows instinctively what it is. He carefully carries it to the kitchen table, his heart heavy with a profound sense of intrusion, of touching a past he was never truly a part of. Isabella enters, her hands dusted with flour, and her eyes fall on the box. Her composure, which Thomas has come to admire, falters for a moment. He expects tears, but she simply walks over, her touch gentle as she traces the carving on the lid. It's a familiar design of a horse and a pen, a symbol of Daniel's twin passions. She looks at Thomas, her gaze a quiet invitation, an unspoken question. Are you ready to face this together? He nods, and for the first time, he doesn't feel alone in his grief. They are two lonely people about to open a window to the man they both loved. That evening, the world outside has faded to a deep, peaceful blue. The only light in the house comes from the dancing flames of the fireplace. Isabella and Thomas sit across from each other, the box resting between them. The contents are spread on the table: a journal, some pressed flowers, and a bundle of letters addressed to Thomas. Letters Daniel had written, but never sent. The atmosphere is solemn, yet filled with a new, quiet purpose. They are not husband and wife right now. They are two friends, united by a common loss. Isabella, with a small, fragile smile, picks up the journal first. She reads a passage, her voice soft, but filled with a familiar affection. It's an entry about a failed attempt at baking bread, and Daniel's self-deprecating humor about it. Thomas lets out a low chuckle, a sound he hasn't made since Daniel died. He remembers Daniel's awful bread, and the memory, no longer just a source of pain, becomes a moment of shared joy. They pass the journal back and forth, reading entries about his love for the land, his simple pleasures, and his unwavering devotion to Isabella. In his words, they see the kind and gentle men they both knew, and the distance between them begins to fade. Thomas then picks up the bundle of letters addressed to him. He hesitates, but Isabella's gaze is a quiet encouragement. The first letter is from a year ago. Daniel writes of his love for his wife, but also of his fear for her future. He writes of Thomas's quiet strength, his honor, and how he knows Thomas would be the only man in the world he could trust to care for Isabella. He writes of the plan, the last will, and how Thomas would be the reluctant hero of his story. Thomas's hand trembles as he reads, the words of his friend a crushing, yet beautiful, burden. Thomas puts the letter down, his voice thick with emotion. He looks at Isabella, his heart exposed for the first time. He speaks not as a husband, but as a man confessing his soul. Thomas, when Daniel saved my life, I promised him I'd live for the both of us. He was a poet, a better man than me. I've carried that. I've lived a life of quiet penance. Marrying you, it felt like the last piece of that, the last promise I had to keep to him. He confesses his burden, the weight he's been carrying all this time. Isabella, her eyes filled with a deep empathic understanding, reaches out and gently places her hand on his. Her touch is a profound comfort, a silent acknowledgement of his pain and his honor. Isabella, with a newfound vulnerability, shares her own fears. Her voice is soft and low, a quiet reflection of her journey. Isabella, Daniel knew he was dying. He knew what a lonely life I would have. I was scared, Thomas. When the will came, I was prepared for a different kind of man, a gruff, unkind man. But you are a good man, Thomas, a man of honor. I didn't get the husband I expected. I got a friend in my grief. She looks at him, her gaze not of a woman who needs saving, but of a woman who has found a partner. The final wall between them crumbles. The grief they both carried alone has now become a bridge that connects them. The silence that follows is no longer awkward or distant. It is a shared, profound understanding of their past, their present, and the strange, beautiful path that brought them together. Thomas, his heart full, moves to her side, a profound tenderness in his eyes. He has not just married his friend's widow, he has found a kindred spirit, a woman who understands the quiet language of honor and loss. He reaches out, his large, calloused hand cupping her cheek, his touch gentle and sure. Their gazes lock, and in that moment, The last shreds of duty and obligation fall away. He is no longer honoring a dead friend. He is looking at the woman he has come to love. The first kiss they share is a beautiful, quiet declaration of their love, a silent promise not of duty, but of forever. The scene fades to a final shot of them sitting together, her head resting on his shoulder. The box of letters sits on the table, no longer a burden of the past, but a sacred foundation for their future. The flickering firelight illuminates their faces, a testament to two hearts, once broken by grief, now made whole by a love they never thought they would find. The screen opens on the ranch, but it is no longer the struggling, neglected place from the beginning. A year has passed. The fences are sturdy, the porch roof is sound, and the untamed garden has been cultivated into a beautiful, orderly space overflowing with life. The house itself feels like a warm, lived-in home, a testament to the hard work and love of the two people who live there. A quiet peace has settled over the land, a direct reflection of the peace in their hearts. The burden of a promise has been transformed into the shared joy of a new life. A warm afternoon breeze rustles through the trees. Thomas sits on the porch he repaired, his gaze sweeping over the thriving land that is no longer just his, but theirs. He is a man who came here to fulfill a duty, but he has found his greatest joy in the quiet companionship of his wife. Isabella sits beside him, her hands resting in her lap, a quiet contentment on her face. They are two halves of a whole, her quiet grace and his rugged strength working together in perfect harmony. They don't need to speak to know what the other is thinking. Their love has become its own language. Thomas had honored his promise to the dead. He had given his friend's widow a home and protection, just as Daniel had asked. But in doing so, he had received something far more valuable in return. He had been given a new life, a new purpose, and a new love that had healed the wounds of his past. The stoic, grief-stricken man who had arrived at this ranch filled with dread and prejudice was gone. In his place was a man who had discovered that the greatest act of honor isn't a sacrifice, but the willingness to open your heart to a new beginning. Thomas turns to look at Isabella, a profound love in his eyes that was once a guarded, cold emptiness. He takes her hand in his large, calloused fingers, a stark contrast to her gentle, competent ones. He speaks, his voice a low, heartfelt rumble, the words carrying the weight of a year of shared hardship and quiet joy. Thomas, when I read Daniel's will, I feared I was inheriting a burden, a life of endless duty. I rode here ready to face a lifetime of sacrifice. I was a fool. He shakes his head, a small, self-deprecating smile on his lips. Isabella's eyes, filled with a beautiful mix of affection and understanding, meet his. Thomas, I was so busy seeing the promise I had to keep, I couldn't see the life I was being given. I thought I was fulfilling a promise to him. I never imagined that in doing so, I would be given the greatest gift of my life. He lifts her hand and presses a kiss to her knuckles. His simple, honest words are the most beautiful poetry she has ever heard. The promise has not been broken, but fulfilled in a way none of them could have ever imagined. It was not a burden of honor, but an act of love. Isabella, her eyes glistening with unshed tears, leans her head against his shoulder. Her voice, once so quiet and reserved, is now filled with a warmth he has come to cherish. Isabella, and I was a widow, a woman alone and afraid. I was so grateful for your honor, but I never imagined my life would be this happy. Thank you, Thomas, for keeping your promise, for being here. He holds her close, their bodies a silent testament to a journey from grief to joy. The ranch, the house, the love they shared, is all the legacy of a man who loved them both. The final, heartbreaking clause of Daniel's will, once a source of dread, has become the foundation of their happiness. The scene ends on a beautiful, quiet image of them sitting together, a loving partnership forged from duty and sealed with love. The sun sets on the horizon, painting the sky with a gentle, fading light. Their future stretches out before them, not as a lonely and uncertain path, but as a shared, beautiful journey. The camera pans away from the couple into the horizon, the vast, empty space now filled with the promise of a future they will build together.